Emperor Nero's reign has been characterized as one of the most brutal and tyrannical in ancient Rome's history. But how did those around him fare? What is it about this period of time that led to such tyranny? And what did these people do to survive? Hello everyone. Today we're going to learn about one of the many victims under Nero's rule, the Roman senator Publius Clodius Thrasea. You might recognize that name from one of my previous videos. That was his wife. Thrasea was born in 46 or 45 BC into an old and influential patrician family. His father was a relative of Cicero and his mother belonged to the gens Julia, which was descended from Caesar himself. This meant that Thrasea was related to some of the most important figures in Roman history, including Julius Caesar, Augustus, and even Nero. However, Thrasea didn't come from a wealthy family. The Claudi had produced a number of distinguished statesmen and generals, but they were never fabulously wealthy like the Julias or the Cornelii. Nevertheless, Thrasea was well educated and prepared for a political career. We know very little about his early life, but we do have some information about his youth. For example, we know that during the civil war between Caesar and Pompey, Thrasea sided with Caesar. He must have been quite young at this point, perhaps a teenager, because Caesar made him the godfather of his illegitimate sons. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Thrasea served as one of Caesar's triumvirate with Octavian and Mark Antony. At some point, he changed his name from Appius Claudius Pulcher to Publius Clodius Thrasea. We don't know why he changed his name, but it's possible that it was to distinguish himself from another Roman senator named Appius Claudius Pulcher. During the civil war between Octavian and Mark Antony, Thrasea supported Octavian. As a reward, Octavian granted him the governorship of Asia Minor from 32 to 30 BC. While Thrasea was governor, there was a revolt in Bithynia and Pontus. Thrasea put down the revolt, but it seems that he wasn't really interested in the job. Instead, he preferred to spend his time in Athens, where he studied philosophy and befriended several Stoics, including Ponietius, who was a prominent Stoic philosopher. In fact, Thrasea became so enamored with Stoicism that he began to follow its march. He started wearing simple clothes, shaving his head and eating very little. This may seem extreme to us, but keep in mind that this was ancient Rome. These were men who were used to wearing fine clothes, eating delicious food and being very comfortable. Thrasea's friends thought that he was being ridiculous, but his wife, Ariel, supported his decision. She was also a Stoic, and she believed that it was more important to be virtuous than to be rich or powerful. Together, Thrasea and Ariel set an example of marital harmony for all Romans. When Thrasea's term as governor ended, he returned to Rome and began to put his philosophical ideals into practice. He refused to take bribes, and he worked hard to help the poor. He was also very honest, even if it wasn't convenient. For example, once Thrasea was giving a speech in the Senate and he heard someone whispering behind him. He stopped speaking, looked around to see who was whispering, and then continued his speech. When someone whispered again, Thrasea stopped and looked around again. This happened several times, and it drove the senator crazy. Eventually, Thrasea turned to the man and said, "Do you think I am so deaf that I can't hear you?" The man was ashamed and admitted that he was whispering. Thrasea replied, "Then just speak up. If you have something to say, it's better to speak up and be heard than to whisper and remain silent." In 17 AD, Thrasea was appointed governor of Syria. This was a very important province, and it came with a lot of power and wealth. But Thrasea wasn't interested in power or wealth. He saw his position as a chance to help the province and its people. He worked hard to improve their lives, and he was very successful. Under his rule, Syria Unfortunately, his successor, the Syrian king, didn't do such a great job. There was a famine and a revolt by the Jews. So when Thrasea returned to Rome in 14 AD, he was greeted as a hero. It seemed that everything was going well for Thrasea. He had a beautiful wife, a successful career, and the respect of his peers. But all of this would change when Nero became emperor. As you probably already know, Emperor Nero is one of the most infamous rulers in history. He's known for his cruelty, his extravagance, and his paranoia. These traits would lead to the downfall of many people, including Publius Clodius Thrasea. Nero came to power in the year 54 AD. His mother was very influential during his early reign, and she helped him to make many important decisions. But in 59 AD, Nero had her murdered. Without Agrippa's influence, Nero became more and more tyrannical. He alienated many of his advisors and senators, and he began to persecute anyone who he suspected of disloyalty. One of these people was Thrasea. It's not clear why Nero persecuted Thrasea, but it probably had something to do with his relationship with the emperor's mother. In 58 AD, Thrasea had criticized Agrippina for her involvement in politics. He called her a woman devoid of modesty, and this angered her. Before Nero took power, Agrippina had exiled Thrasea and his wife, Ariel, from Rome. When Nero became emperor, he recalled them and allowed them to keep their property. But it seems that this was only a temporary measure, because in 63 AD, Thrasea was exiled again. This time, he was accused of plotting against Nero. We don't know if Thrasea was actually involved in the plot, but it didn't matter. Nero had him executed in the same year. Thrasea's wife, Ariel, would have the same fate. A few years later, in 65 AD, she was accused of being involved in a conspiracy against Nero, and she was also executed. But let's go back to 63 AD. While Thrasea was being dragged to his execution, He was visited by his friend, the philosopher Seneca. Seneca tried to convince Thrace to take his own life rather than be executed by Nero, but Thrace refused. He was willing to die for his principles, but he didn't want to make Nero look weak. He was afraid that if he committed suicide, Nero would think that he had been defeated. So Thrace chose to be executed. There are two accounts of Thracia's death. According to the first account, written by the Roman historian Tacitus, the second account comes from the Greek historian. He says that Thrasea was beaten to death with a club. I think that Tacitus' account is more accurate because Suetonius were alive during Nero's rule, so he got much of his information from other sources. These sources may have exaggerated Thracia's death to make Nero look worse. Thrasea was only 45 or 46 years old when he died. He had a promising career ahead of him, and he could have accomplished great things if he had lived longer, but Nero's tyranny cut his life short. What I find most interesting about Thrasea is his commitment to his principles. He didn't compromise when it was difficult, and he was willing to sacrifice everything for what he believed in. This included his own life. Thracia's story reminds us that it's always important to stand up for what we believe in, no matter what the cost. It doesn't matter if we're dealing with a tyrannical emperor or a small bully. It's always important to resist oppression and tyranny, no matter how powerful the oppressor is. Thrasea story also reminds us that the greatest dangers to freedom often come from within. Nero was able to take power away from the Roman people because they allowed him to. They elected him as their leader and gave him the power to make laws and enforce them. When Nero began to abuse his power, the Roman people didn't resist him. They just went along with it. They either supported him or kept quiet and hoped that he would go away. But this didn't work. Nero became more and more tyrannical, and he eventually took away all of their rights and freedoms. Thrasea was one of the few people who resisted Nero. He spoke out against him and tried to hold him accountable for his actions. But even Thrasea couldn't save Rome from Nero's tyranny. Thrasea and his wife Arria are both buried in the Via Appia. Their tomb still stands today, and it is a reminder of the price that was paid to resist Nero's tyranny. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and comment below to let me know what you thought. Also, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so now. With your support, I can continue to make more videos about the fascinating history of ancient Rome. Thanks for watching.